Hello from Liverpool. So this video is as promised. I know a lot of you have been messaging me, emailing me about how to fill job applications, and basically a lot of you are confused about what's going on and where you can improve your applications or how to just fill it, and it's really hard getting constant rejections. So just before I start explaining and take you through my application, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some things to keep in mind when you're starting out on this journey after your GMC registration to start applying for jobs. Some of the things to be kept in mind are one, it is more competitive now. So getting a job in the UK is not a cakewalk. I know a lot of people during COVID got jobs immediately because the NHS was really struggling with their workforce, but it's not the same anymore. They're still struggling, but now they're also struggling budget-wise. So that's a different thing. So the point being that it is getting more competitive, and the issue is that a lot of juniors came in with the idea that people are just going to be standing on the airports waiting for them to come in, and that's not how it is. So you are competing with other brilliant doctors from around the world, so bear that in mind. On average, people get jobs anywhere between 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer, but there are a lot of factors involved in finding a job. So I'm going to walk through them. The first one being your application. So if you've written a good application, you have a better chance of being shortlisted than if you've just written a generic application, same as everyone else. So I know it's really annoying because you think you're doing the right thing and there isn't a lot of guidance online on how to fill a job application. So I'll walk you through mine, and that should help. So that's one, your job application. The second thing is your CV. So your CV is important not because they're marking you through a criteria. There's no 1 + 1 = 2 answer in terms of getting a job. It's important because it helps you stand out from the rest of the people applying. Because you have to understand that there are so many people applying for a limited number of jobs that you have to make sure that you look different from the rest. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to have a lot of a significant number of researches published or another, like 20 audits or like years of experience. It's just about showing that you're different from the rest. And one of the ways to do that is to build your CV. So we've gone through application, CV. The third thing is when you fill the application. So as soon as a job opens, try to fill it quickly, and once you've filled in enough applications, you'll sort of know the kind of questions that are asked, so you can have your answers prepared already. Because it really helps when you're on top of the list. I wasn't when I was applying, so I made a mistake. That was a mistake that I've learned from. So when you're filling in a job application, try to fill it earlier rather than later. The fourth thing is doing an attachment. So having a clinical attachment in the same trust is really helpful because it helps you with networking, and it shows that you know how that trust and specifically that department works. It also helps in making a good impression. So in my case, job applications had opened while I was doing my attachment. So that was really good because I was right there in the department when everything is happening. I got a lot of help from my colleagues and F2s who very graciously went through my applications and recommended things that I could do better and things I was doing wrong. So I think we're all looking for a little bit of support during this time, and doing an attachment is really helpful that way. It also helps you understand if that's a trust you want to join. I know we're getting more and more desperate because the jobs are getting harder to get, but it's still important that you try to pick a trust that you would fit in, and do your research about the trust, read up about it when you're doing the attachment, talk to the people, take feedback from other colleagues and registrars and people who are in training in that trust as well. Because your first job sort of eases you into the NHS, and it's really nice when you're in a good department, and I'm in a wonderful trust and hospital, and it makes a world of a difference. So the fourth thing is your clinical attachment. The fifth thing is luck. So there are a lot of times where you think you've met all the essential criterias, you've met the desirable criterias, you should have gotten the job, but sometimes you just don't. And it's probably because you're competing with someone who's come in with years of experience. This could be like a registrar or a consultant, and they want to start from the beginning, and that's completely valid. A lot of us want to have a fresh start, so they are also applying for the same jobs and sometimes at the same level. And that's why sometimes luck is very important. So it's a combination of all of these factors, especially if you're a group of colleagues applying together. Sometimes someone may get a job earlier, and someone may not. And there is no, I'm going to reiterate this a lot of times during this video, there is no simple formula. It is not 1 + 1 = 2. So my in general advice is try to keep applying. Don't let the rejections get to you. It's really hard, the constant rejections, but you have to take it in your stride. Try to ask for feedback when you get a rejection. But you may not always get a feedback, because trusts are getting a lot of applications these days for even one job for an F2, and it's really hard for them to give feedback to everyone. So try to ask for feedback, but don't be upset if you don't get it, and keep improving yourself. So if you keep improving your CV or applications, you will get there. And ask around for help. There are a lot of people available online around you, seniors like me, who've gone through the same pathway, who are very willing to help you out. So ask for help when you have questions. Okay, so that's just general tips and things to keep in mind when applying for jobs. I'm going to now walk you through my application. I'll walk you through my CV first, so that you have an idea of what I was working with when I was applying, and then I'll show you the different ways I answered the questions. So over to that. Hello. So I'm using Zoom and it's a bit temperamental, so I'm really hoping this recording works. Yeah. So we're going to go through my CV first, so you sort of know what I'm working with. And this was a little bit different when I was applying for attachments, but I used the exact similar format for my attachments as well. So once you have a good CV format in place, just make sure that you stick with it and you can keep updating it. So my name, address, phone number, email, and then a bit about me. So a couple of lines. I'm an F2 in A&E at the Royal under the Liverpool Foundation Trust. I really like medical technology, so I was working at ICMR, which is the Indian Council of Medical Research, to develop an AI tool for screening chest X-rays in like for TB and other pulmonary conditions. And a bit of my qualities. So I'm enthusiastic, I'm academically oriented, and the rest, whatever is applicable to you. So a couple of lines about who you are, and this can be at any stage, what you have done before. So a few lines of your experience and a couple of your qualities. So that can be like technology, education, whatever. And yeah, and then you move on to your work experience. So I was at that, when I updated this, I was an incoming FY2 at Luft, and my responsibilities would include clerking of different specialties, patients of different specialties, procedures, handovers, teaching sessions. So you have to keep it brief. Just a couple of lines is enough. Nobody wants to know what you're doing in a lot of detail. They get it. Before that, I did my clinical attachment. I was observing, assisting. So you see here, I was just a second. Yeah. So I attended I attended BLS teachings while I was in the department. And so these are a few things that you can do when you do your attachment. Really helps because it shows that you're genuinely interested in learning and being there and contributing. Before that, while I was in India, I was working as a medical officer in the emergency department. So we call it casualty, but I've mentioned emergency department because the words used are important. So try to mimic the language that is used in the UK because it's easier for them to understand. I worked in the emergency department. It was the state government's first critical care center, St. George's Hospital, which comes under JJ Group of Hospitals, where I studied. And I was asked about it in the interview as well, and I'll make a separate video on that later. But basically, I was posted in the casualty. So you see how I've mentioned casualty here, but emergency department first, because they need to understand where I was working. What I did, I was also involved in training and teaching my interns, so that's important. And these are two observerships I did while I was in med school. So I did a full-time clinical observership in the Department of Diagnostic and Interventional Radiology in Germany, and 1 month in Greece. Then I move on to my educational qualifications. I have written where I studied and so you want to use your CV to highlight your achievements. So I've just mentioned it in one line because I was running out of space. It's hard to edit your CV because there's so much you've done and so much you want to mention. Or on the other hand, you haven't done much, but you want to like make it look full and not empty. But you have to understand that your CV or your resume is just a snapshot of some of your best highlights. So choose those. So I've mentioned my distinctions. Then I've gone on to mention my research experience, which was at the Indian Council of Medical Research. I worked as a project scientist. We were developing an AI tool. I've highlighted the words that I want them to look at. I was also a research assistant in my undergrad. For a study in pediatric orthopedics, development dysplasia of the hip is what we were studying. And I did have more research experience, but it gets really crowded and I didn't want to mention everything. Then I went on to mention my publications. So you see how you cite a publication in as a reference is basically the same thing I've done here, because it's the easiest for them to understand. You can highlight your own name if you like, because I mean, it's your CV. Or you can just leave it like that. I mean, my publications aren't very fancy, so they're not really big. They're just case reports. But I just wanted to highlight the little bit of research publication that I've already done. Okay, then coming to awards, I've been invited as a speaker to a couple of conferences, so I've mentioned those. Then my presentations. So these were all the conferences I attended where I presented any papers that I was working on and any competitions that I won. So I won in the UK, I had attended a conference, and so I won a couple of contests there. And then I had attended an international conference in Portugal where I presented a paper. These were online during COVID, so it was really convenient. Then one in Craiova, and then the national one. So it always goes international first, then national, then regional, and then local, or regional or national, you can sort of figure out. But always your biggest achievements on an international scale first, then your national achievements, and then in local presentations that you've done. So as you can see, it follows the same format. So international, national, local. Teaching program. I had organized a teaching program when I was a medical officer for my interns and other junior doctors. It was basically about managing emergencies. It was a 4-month-long national program to cover basically the differences in knowledge and the gaps, because everyone who studies in a different medical college in India has a different experience. So there are gaps in knowledge for different people coming out of different places, even my interns who've studied in different places. So the dates when it was delivered and what mode I used. So I used a combination of online and board-based, and it made a significant impact. The funny thing is, when I was filling job applications, I did not explain my teaching experience in detail. And it was a colleague who said that you really need to give a brief description of what you've done and like what your experience was. Because I would just write organize a teaching program. So that's why it's important to get that feedback from someone who's been through this process. Then moving on to leadership roles, international again, IFMSA was a student organization. that I was a part of, then Global Consortium of Medical Education and Research. I held a leadership position there. Then I was a part of the Indian Medical Association's Medical Students Network for my state and national as well, but my state was more relevant. I was also the capacity building assistant, which basically means I recruited people. I got the name out for Medical Students Association of India, and I worked as a local officer as well, which I loved. And I was one of the directors for a medical magazine called Lexicon. And basically, if you're looking for student organizations, go for it. It gives you really good research experience. You get to meet a lot of people. It's really nice. You get to do a lot of local events. Even online, you can, if you've graduated and you don't have access to like facilities available, you can do things online. So it's really nice. Get involved. And yeah, so that's about it. I haven't mentioned my references because honestly, I ran out of space. And if they need references, they just ask. So mentioning references available on request is really doesn't add much to the CV. So that's my CV. That's about it. And then moving on to my application. So I'm just going to start from where the application questions are and not walk you through the demographic details. You can fill in your details yourself. You're smart enough, you're doctors. Okay, so a lot of people ask me this question, should I mention my PLAB and my IELTS score? The purpose of any application that you're filling or even your CV is to highlight the good things that you've done. So you don't have to mention your IELTS and your PLAB score because they understand that you need to do an IELTS to become a doctor in the UK. Like that's logical. The reason why I did it was to highlight my scores. So my PLAB 2 score was something I was quite like, it was quite nice. So I highlighted that. And you see in my PLAB 1, I've just written pass because my score wasn't that good that I'd like, talk about it a lot. So yeah, so basically choose to mention the things that where you can highlight your skills. Otherwise, if you don't want to mention your PLABs or your IELTS, you can just mention MBBS and your university and your grade. Some people don't like mentioning their percentages and some people do, and that's okay. Totally your decision. They're not gonna fault you for having like a less percentage or not getting a distinction. They're not being mean to you. Don't worry about it. And just make sure it's chronologically from the most recent to the oldest, because you want to highlight your most recent experiences, right? They don't care what you did like 10 years ago. If you have additional degrees, you can mention it here. If you have an MPH or a master's or a PG cert, you can mention it here as well. I did not have any when I was applying. Training courses. So why have I mentioned these training courses? I've done a lot of courses. I like doing courses, but I did not mention all of them because they aren't relevant to like the job that I was applying for. So just a second. I'm just gonna mute my notifications. Yeah. Okay. So training courses attended were the ones that were relevant. So I'd done BLS during my attachment, as I mentioned before. I'd done a ventilator management program in college. I had done teaching is relevant. Teaching is relevant for any job that you do. So I've done like an IFMSA training for 7 days. I have done scientific writing because I used to be a scientific editor and a writer, which you have seen. I haven't mentioned my CV because I was running out of space. But if you go to my LinkedIn, you can see a lot more things that I actually did. So as I mentioned, tailor your CV, tailor your applications. And I did like a surgical skills course. This was really old. It was in 2018. I think this was in second year of med school, but it's relevant to an A&E job because you would do sutures. So I've mentioned it. I had done a lot of courses. Like I had done courses related to public health, to sexual health, but again, not relevant to the job. So I didn't mention it. Then my membership experience, I have GMC registration. And then coming to employer activity. So my employer name, so I've mentioned my clinical attachment, obviously. So that's Royal Liverpool, my educational supervisor, their contact details, my job title when I did it, and I was an observer is what I've written. My duration, I did it for 1 month. And as an observer, what were my responsibilities? So I haven't mentioned a lot. I mean, you can mention more details. This was, again, I'm mentioning it's my first application, so it's not my best, but I just want to keep it real because it's important to do that. So I've just written that as a attachee, I was involved in assessment, clerking, triage. I did IV cannulation, bloods. I did weekly teaching. I attended the PLS. If you've done more things, if you've done an audit, if you could get involved in some teaching, you can please mention that. Highlight the good things that you did. Okay, coming to my previous experience. So this is when I worked as a medical officer. So where I worked, my superintendent, the the hospital where I was placed, it was a fixed term contract. I did it for 8 months and 15 days. So 8.5 months. So I was involved in assessment, clerking, triage, IV cannulation. So you see how I'm using words like assessment, clerking, triage. We don't use clerking in India. We say we're seeing a patient, like that's understood. But I've mimicked the words that are used in the UK. And I sort of understood that right from the beginning. And a lot of people don't know that. So please try to see the job description and the person specifications and pick up the words from there. I provided primary care, so I basically made sure the patient was stable. I was assisting the department, so I was basically doing appropriate referrals. So right now, if I were to rephrase these sentences, I would write things like I was making appropriate referrals, escalating, because those are the words used here. Now that I've been in the NHS for 2 months, I know that these are the words that are used. So I would not write assistance to the departments. So you see, as you go along, you get more and more experience. Assistance to the pediatrics department, assistance to orthopedics, by basically working with the on-call departments, getting the residents to see the patients. I did VIP duty. I was posted for VIP duty, and I was obviously involved in training interns and observers in the emergency department. So that's about it. That's all the experience I have post graduation. This is the experience I have like while I was doing my internship. So here you can see it's much bigger because there's a lot more to write. So again, I've highlighted my medicine and casualty, that is emergency medicine experience first, because it's an A&E job. Then general surgery, because it's obviously relevant. Then obstetrics and gynecology. Then pediatrics, because A&E is quite broad. If suppose you're applying for an ENT job, then I would mention ENT on top, and then surgical, then medicine, and etc. etc. Like you get the idea. And I didn't mention, I mean, I had a lot of small postings in like ENT Ofthal, but I didn't elaborate on it because it's not relevant. It's like 15 days of postings. So I've just mentioned it in one line. So you have to understand where to elaborate and where to summarize. And that comes with filling your applications, getting it reviewed, things like that. Okay. And you see, I've written in points. This was something that was pointed out to me, that don't write in paragraphs, write in points. It makes it easier for someone to read it. And I agree. Coming to practical experience. So things like I've done intubations. I did them as a medical officer, and blood collection, but this wasn't relevant. We don't intubate in A&E. In you, like anesthesia people intubate. We don't intubate as A&E medics. Uh, so I mean, I wouldn't. I At that point I thought intubation was relevant because I did it as a medical officer, so I've mentioned it. But in hindsight, it wasn't necessary. But blood collection, IV cannulation, nasogastric tubes, I've done a lot, and they were quite surprised. They're surprised even now that I've done so many NG tubes, but I've done quite a lot of them back home because I was in a government hospital and we had a lot of patients coming in with obstruction. So we would put in a lot of NG tubes. Foley's, Foley's is here done by nurses, but you can mention it. It's an important skill to have. Catheterization and VBGs and ABGs. If you were in like a respiratory department, you would have probably done way more than this. I've sort of underplayed my experience because writing like 100 plus or 200 plus sounds a bit ridiculous. So I've given an estimate, and I've sort of underplayed my experience here just so it doesn't sound ridiculous to someone who's worked in the UK and never worked in like a South Asian country. But yeah, this is how you mentioned your practical experience, my teaching experience. So now here is when my colleague had mentioned that explain what you've done, like explain the program. So 4 month long teaching, national level teaching program, gaps, as I mentioned before. And then I've written the names of the session. Initially, I had just written these 3 lines. And she said, that's not enough. Explain what was in it. So I've mentioned the name of each of the sessions. And then I was running out of space. So I just mentioned, I've also been involved in like bedside teaching and peer-to-peer teaching. Qualifications in teaching, I'd done an international course for 7 days. It's not like too fancy. It's not like a PG certification, medical education, or it's not from like a big university like Harvard or Oxford or whatever. It's whatever experience I did have. So I've highlighted that. So don't worry if you've not got like very fancy things to write. It's okay. They're expecting you to apply for a junior level position, and this is well and good. So if you've got some experience, highlight it well. I've just mentioned what the sessions were. So 4D, 4C, non-formal medical education, competency-based medical education, teaching methodologies. So yeah, so I've mostly just mentioned whatever experience I got from the teaching sessions. And then assessment, like you get it. I did not have, now this is something I want to highlight. I did not have any audit or quips, because in a government setup in India, we're not allowed to do audits. Like they're nearly impossible to do, and it's quite disappointing, but it is what it is. So I did not have any audit experience. So a lot of people ask me, oh, what if I haven't done any research, or what if I haven't done any audits, or like what if I haven't done any teaching? That's fine. You don't have to have everything of everything. It's good if you do. If you do have it, please do highlight your experience in audits. But if you don't have something, it's not the end of the world. You can keep working towards it. So for instance, had I not gotten a job, my plan was to go back and do a couple of audits in a private setup. So you can keep working at improving your application and your CV. I did have like I did do research, obviously extensively, because I was at, at the Indian Council of Medical Research. So this is what I was involved in. When did I do it? So I started in June. I did it for, I think, nearly 8 or 9 months. And what were we trying to do? So, and what was my contribution? So what did I do? So I did a lot more. If you go on my LinkedIn, you can see my entire description, but this is basically a gist of what I did. And then, as you saw in my CV, I was a research assistant at a super specialty hospital. So I've mentioned that and what I did. So I did enrollment and I contacted the families, I got the data. So it doesn't matter if your research project has ended or not. Like a lot of researches go on for years. Like the ICMR project I was involved in is still going on. But you contributed, and that is what you need to mention. Qualifications in research, I did a research course. Like this was all in like undergrad or just like internship or something. So I've mentioned that. So I've attended several workshops. I've just chosen the one that I found was the most relevant. So what I learned from it as well. And publications, as I mentioned before. So the type of study, the date, the journal title. If it's PubMed index, it's better. Even if it's not, it's fine. You can mention it. And the title and the authors. And then, yeah, like again, I've mentioned the papers that are more relevant to the job. So I've mentioned the Lung India because it's pulmonary medicine, again, relevant to A&E. And then I mentioned my anatomy paper, because again, anatomy is relevant to A&E. It's relevant to surgery. It's basically relevant to everything, but more relevant to these papers. And then this is a surgical paper, so I've mentioned it lower down. So you see basically how I've prioritized the information. In hindsight, I could have probably placed paraquat tongue higher, but it's fine. It's not the end of the world if it's upper niche. But yeah. Presentations, again, international first. and then international again. Sorry, why is it being weird? International again, and then again international or national. So this was national, sorry. So any presentation, if you've done a local presentation in your department, if you've done a presentation in your in a conference in your college, if you've done a national presentation, anything is fine. It's experience. You have public speaking experience, which is what matters. Prizes or distinctions, I had a couple of distinctions, luckily. So I've just mentioned that my university gives us distinctions and pediatrics, uh, ENT, and pathology. So whatever you have, if you have some, good, mention it. If you don't, it's okay. They're not they're not going to fault you for it. Management and leadership, I had a lot of this experience because I like leadership roles. I like working with teams. So I've just highlighted the ones that I found were particularly relevant. So you can see the Indian Medical Association, the Global Consortium of Medical Education and Research, and the Lexicon Medical Magazine one. You see in my CV, there's a lot more information, but here I've limited to 3 examples which I found were relevant. Rather than mentioning a huge paragraph and multiple things which makes it confusing, just highlight the stuff you actually care about, that you can answer about, that you want to highlight. And it doesn't have to just be medicine related. I want to clarify that Lexicon is a medical magazine, but it's not about being on the shop floor, right? A lot of people disagree with this. I think a lot of people will tell you to mention only like if you were a rota coordinator or if you had like a leadership position inside your hospital. But I think you want them to see a bit of your personality, right? Like they're not hiring you for how formal you can be, but they're hiring you also for like you're a real person. So you can show a bit of your personality in your application, and that's what they're looking for. Don't copy everyone else's. Team working, I was a local officer for again a student organization. I played I played a football match for my sports fest in the girls football team. I scored a goal. Clearly, I was very proud of that for some reason. I scored a goal and the team placed second. So yay. I was a creative team member. Again, I was a member and then I became a leader in the magazine. Again, a lot of people will tell you only mention like hospital stuff, but I think it's okay to have a little bit of a personality and show that you're a person outside of med school. Coming to supportive information, so I'm excited to submit my application, and why I wanted to do it. I've always prioritized the well-being. I've mentioned words like teamwork, communication. Now, this is all in the like person specification and the trust, like the trust values. When you're filling the supporting information, please look up the trust, like Google the trust at least, and see what they care about. Like they care about you being like communicative, if they care about you being hardworking, if they care about you being innovative, use those words or highlight like that experience that you've gained, about how it's relevant to the skills they want you to have. So if they're looking for something like communication and teamwork, then you mention I was working in the emergency department, I collaborate with MDTs. So you see how I've used like multidisciplinary team. No one uses these words, at least in my country. But this is how they talk here. So it's important to use that. And I've mentioned, like I've highlighted, sneakily slipped in my IELTS score. I'm sure they don't read it in this much detail. Nobody is like combing through every line, but it's just nice to put in the effort of actually trying to highlight your experiences. Then I've always prioritized the well-being and dignity of my patients, especially in emergency situations, because again, it's an A&E job and I have A&E experience, and that's what I've highlighted. Again, being safe, efficient, effective, and teamwork is something I really wanted to highlight, because A&E and emergency departments only function if we're working well together as a team. And then I mentioned my clinical attachment because that shows that I understand the department, I understand how the NHS works. And so you've seen how I've said it'll streamline my entry into the trust grade job. I ended up getting an F2, but that's the point being that it shows your commitment to getting a job, and that you know how it's going to work. I have a better understanding how the emergency department functions, along with confidence in clerking, assessment, and minor procedures, because I've used the words. Again, language is very important. I've used the words that they're looking for. I love the city. So, as I mentioned, I like my application to show my personality. I love the city. So, and I'm eager to pursue training. Like, one of my definite loves is emergency medicine, other than the other one being radiology. But I'm eager to pursue training, so that again, it shows that I'm dedicated to what I'm doing and I'm not just there as a visitor. So then I've mentioned my interpersonal skill, my organizational skills, my previous leadership experience helps highlight that. I have a strong background in research and data management. Um, and you see how you've written, I'm well prepared for audits, because I want to show that even though I don't have audit experience, and that's fine, I'm still someone who would be willing to learn and willing to grow. And I can apply research outcomes in a clinical setting for problem solving, and I'm enthusiastic. And you basically have to push yourself up. You have to show that you're really good at what you do. And then I was involved in AI research, which is I find very cool. So I basically have an idea. So you see how my supporting information is just going back on my experiences and showing what I bring to the job, and how it can streamline hospital processes, enhance quality and care. Uh, bring an innovative mindset. So one of the trust values in Luft is innovative. So I've highlighted that. So you see the focus of this trust on innovation. It'll help me hone my skills. But honestly, I'm looking at my application after a really long time, and I'm impressed myself because I don't know, it was one of my first. I understand the importance of confidentiality. So now these are important things you need to know. Risk management, especially in A&E, where you understand that some patients will need triaging, some patients will need inpatient management, then safeguarding. These are, again, important things to learn and to pick up when you're doing your attachment or when you're filling your applications, that you understand these concerns. And I've also I did like a little course on like pediatric safeguarding. So I've mentioned pediatric safeguarding as well. And professional, like you want to be professional, so you've mentioned that. And I engage in CPD, which is continuous professional development. I do a lot of conferences because it's fun, but I've mentioned that. And then teaching and training, I've mentioned my previous teaching experience. See, and you see there are weekly departmental teaching sessions. I know this because I did the attachment, and I know because my teaching skills will contribute to that. So understand and reflect on your previous experiences and use that to write your supporting information. Please don't blindly copy someone's information, and don't think that, oh, they wrote this, so I should write the same thing and then I'll get the job. That's not how it works. You are your own individual, you are your own person. So write it like that. And if I get the chance as a junior doctor, I would be representing my trust at different conferences, because as I mentioned, I like CPD, I like conferences. And then my involvement in public health, it sets me apart because I've always believed in serving the community via healthcare. And I've mentioned the awareness events I've done, and I've mentioned joining the Royal Liverpool would be a dream come true, because it really is. I really like the trust and the hospital. And I've mentioned why I like it. So they're really safe, they're really respectful, is what I learned during my attachment. Everybody at this trust really cares about patients and is really wonderful. So I'm eager to be a part of this culture that values like improvement and collaboration. So that's it. And then the rest of it is, do you have like a GMC registration, and then your references bit, and that's it. And then whatever the rest of your details. So there's not much to it. So yeah, that's it. That's about it. If you've got questions about your job applications, how to fill them, a lot of people ask me, what am I doing wrong? And you're probably And in all honesty, you're probably not doing anything wrong. It's just that I mentioned there's a combination of things that need to work out for you to get a job. So my takeaway is um, there's a combination of things that just need to work. So my takeaway is keep filling applications, tailor your applications, go through the person specification and job descriptions. Um, Try to improve yourself because, as I mentioned, it is competitive now. It's similar to going to any other country. Like, it's not a cakewalk. And it shouldn't be. Like, we should try to better ourselves and improve and, just be good at what we do. And healthy competition pushes us to it. So stay hopeful, try to keep improving, try to keep filling job applications, and ask for help when you need it. And if you have any questions, put it down in the doobly doo. And like, share, subscribe. It feels very cringy to say that, but yeah. And there's also WhatsApp groups that I'm adding in the description because it's easier to communicate and I can directly answer your questions rather than emailing it because that takes me a bit of time to get to. So, yeah, I hope that helps and all the best on your job hunt.